She taped a neon violation on my door like a public scarlet letter, and then fined me $200 a day for keeping 3 harmless hens in my own backyard. No warning, no mercy, just humiliation from a power-drunk HOA president in a pink suit who thought she owned our entire neighborhood. She threatened my home, my savings, and everything I had left, all because she believed people like me don't fight back. But she had no idea I was about to expose her, legally outsmart her, and turn the entire community against her. You're going to want to see what she lost in the end. Watch until the final moment. The karma is unforgettable. The paper glared like a wound. Neon, taped at eye level, crooked on my front door so the whole cul-de-sac could stare while walking their dogs. Remove chickens. Immediately. Fines begin. No hello, no grace. A signature cut across the bottom like a blade. I stood there with my keys in my hand and felt heat climb my neck. 3 hens in a tidy coop, quiet by dawn, cleaner than most garages. And they called it livestock. Not pets, not therapy, not the only steady thing in a year that took my marriage, my job, and most of my pride. I scanned the street. Curtains shifted. Someone pretended to water a planter, eyes fixed on me. Humiliation has a sound, like a screen door closing too slowly. I pulled the notice free and read the thread again. Fines daily. Liens if unpaid. Compliance checks at HOA's discretion. My coop sat behind a cedar fence, legal height, painted to match the house. The hens murmured from their roost like they knew. Even their soft clucks sounded guilty now. I hated that. I stepped inside and paced the kitchen, palms sweating, anger turning bright and stupid. Rage wants to swing. Strategy wants to breathe. I chose the second. Barely. 2 hours later, a second notice arrived in my email. Unapproved structure. A third followed for odor complaints. I opened the window and exhaled into air that smelled like cut grass and chlorine from the neighborhood pool. Odor, my eye. This wasn't about smell, it was about control. They struck fast because they expect silence. I printed the notices. I laid them flat. I made coffee strong and black, then started a list. What they claimed, what I knew, what they hoped I didn't. At noon, a white SUV rolled past my driveway slower than usual, clipboard on the dash, sunglasses. A little pause, a little smirk, like a queen taking inventory of peasants. The SUV idled another heartbeat, then moved on. The message was clear. We see you. We own the rule book. We can squeeze until you break. I opened the coupe, checked feed, smooth straw. Hazel blinked up at me, head tilted, a tiny life asking a simple question, are we safe? I closed the door gently and answered no one, because I didn't know. By evening, a 4th citation hit. Excessive noise at early hours. They stamped time on it I could disprove. The precision felt deliberate, a dare to fight. My throat tightened. I pictured a lien, a for sale, my name in a county posting like a warning flare, all for 3 hens that kept me from unraveling. When the streetlights flicked on, I made a decision that tasted like steel. I wasn't going to argue with a clipboard. I was going to bury it in paperwork. At 7 a.m. the next day, I sat at my dining table with a stack of bylaws, county code, zoning maps, and a spiral notebook. My life had burned once this year, not again. I turned the first page and sharpened a pencil. War, but with pages. Every line a weapon they forgot I could hold. Patterns reveal predators. I walked the block and collected stories like receipts. A veteran fined for a flag displayed at the wrong angle. A widow forced to repaint her porch because the blue offended a pallet committee. A dad ticketed because his trash can lingered too visible after pickup day. Each story shared the same shiver at the end. Don't use my name. The board made fear a currency. Pay or be made an example. By afternoon, I had 6 conversations and a heavier pocket. People lowered their voices when they said the president's name, as if it might summon her. The board met twice a month, but they inspected twice a week. Citations multiplied like fruit flies. A neighbor whispered that the fines helped float enhancements around the pool. Perfect hedges, upgraded loungers, a new keypad that never worked right. Money in, comfort out to those on the right side of the rules. My inbox dinged. Another notice, failure to remove livestock. The timestamp said 6 a.m. I was in the backyard at 6 a.m., hands in straw, morning air clean as glass. The accusation felt surgical. They wanted me breathless. They were getting close. Fear edits your house. You walk softer. You hide what you love. I found myself closing blinds during the day, moving the coupe shade a fraction, rehearsing answers to questions no one had asked yet. I hated the crouch they put me in. It wasn't who I was, so I climbed out of it. I spread the HOA bylaws across the floor like a crime board. Sections highlighted, margins armed with questions. Who approves fines? What constitutes a structure? How do county rules intersect with private covenants? I read until the print blurred. Then I looked beyond the HOA to the county code, the state statutes, the boring bones under the shiny neighborhood skin. And there, half buried in legalese, I saw a phrase that slowed my breathing to something precise. Agricultural exemption. Low-impact small livestock. A clause about residential properties under a threshold that qualified if the activity was for production of agricultural goods, including eggs. I read it again. Then a third time. If this applied, their citations weren't just flimsy, they were illegal. I checked the date on the statute, the cross-references, the county's guidance page. It was current. It was plain. It was like someone had left a back door unlocked and assumed the peasants could not read. If I could qualify, I wouldn't argue about hens. I would own them, legally, publicly, beyond HOA reach. At 9 a.m., the county office opened. I printed the statute, tucked it into a manila folder, and set my alarm for 8 a.m. with one thought beating steady. They wanted immediate war. They were about to get lawful shock. The county building still smelled like floor wax and old paper. A clerk behind glass asked what I needed. I slid the statute through and spoke calmly, like I hadn't slept on a fuse. Agricultural exemption application for low-impact egg production, micro, backyard. The clerk raised an eyebrow, then checked a screen. We do have a process. She handed me a packet. My fingers shook, not from fear, but from the sensation of something heavy about to lift. I filled every line like a vow. Property size. Coop footprint, number of hens, egg production estimates. No roosters, no slaughter, no nuisance. I added photos, receipts for feed, a simple one-page plan for distribution. Above all, I will maintain sanitation and neighbor safety. The clerk stamped the first page, initialed every attachment, and gave me a timeline. An inspector may drive by. If approved, you'll receive your exemption and a registration number. On my way out, I read the bold text at the bottom of the packet. Private associations may not override county agricultural allowances. It felt like a bell tolling inside my chest. Not loud. I didn't need loud. I needed true. I drove home on a grid of streets named for trees and presidents, the same as any suburb in America. Lawns cut low, kids chalking stars on concrete. The pool glittered to my right like a promise I never asked for. My coop sat steady behind the cedar fence, hens shifting, heads bright. 3 days later, the envelope arrived. Approval, my name, my parcel number, registration granted under the county's small agricultural program. The letterhead looked ceremonial. I took a breath that reached places I hadn't felt since the year crashed. I didn't tell the neighborhood yet. I didn't post. I didn't wave the paper in anyone's face. I made copies. I put one on my fridge, one in a binder, one in a Ziploc under the coop lid like a secret flag. The HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 6 p.m. in the clubhouse. The agenda listed community standards and enforcement updates. They expected another quiet performance where fear did the talking. They expected me to sit small in a metal chair and accept my turn on the wheel. I ironed a shirt. I stacked my binder, exemption letter, code printouts, timeline of citations, photos of a clean coop, statements from neighbors ready to talk when called. Not gossip, evidence. At 5 p.m. I walked to the clubhouse, early, controlled. As the sun slid behind roofs, the parking lot filled. Folding chairs scraped vinyl inside. I took a front seat and put my binder on my lap. The board entered and took their places like actors on a stage. When they called my name, I stood. I didn't come to plead. I came to read the law like scripture they had forgotten. The room carried that community center echo, soft chatter, a cough, the rustle of papers. The president opened with a smile too tight to be friendly. She recited rules about order, limits, decorum, every word another fence. Then she announced enforcement highlights and flashed a slide of my house blurred but obvious to anyone who knew the curve of our street. Gasps. A murmur of satisfaction from the obedient few. Shame as theater. Owner has been uncooperative, she said. Continuing violations. I stepped forward. Point of order. My voice traveled farther than I expected. She tried to gabble me down. I kept speaking, steady. I have documentation that renders your citations void. I am now registered with the county under a small agricultural exemption. The law states your association cannot supersede this. I placed the stamped letter on the table so the nearest rows could see the seal. Silence arranged itself like chairs. A neighbor in the back whispered, "Is that real?" Another stood to get a better look. The board members leaned in, expressions wobbling between disdain and alarm. The president repeated that HOA bylaws were binding. I read the county statute aloud. I did not raise my voice. I didn't need to. The room did it for me. Hums, whispers, a sound like a curtain tearing. Someone clapped half a beat too soon. Another joined. The president's jaw tightened. I outlined the procedural failings, fines issued without proper board vote, inspections conducted without notice, photos taken from outside designated common areas. I said, "Due process," and watched two board members glance at each other like they'd heard thunder indoors. The president tried a new angle, community character, but the county code didn't care about her adjectives. It cared about thresholds, allowances, protections older than her gavel. She reached for fear again, promising increased fines, liens, court. I opened my binder to the page titled Remedies and Recourse and set it beside the letter. Neighbors who'd been quiet for years stood up. A man in a ball cap said he'd been fined for a mailbox he'd already fixed. A mom with a stroller said her husband had been threatened for parking half a tire on the curb. One by one, they spoke. The room tilted. The president slammed the gavel and adjourned the meeting, mid-sentence, mid-truth, declaring the discussion unproductive. She gathered her papers with trembling hands, ignoring the questions that followed her to the door. I walked out into a night rung with crickets and hushed congratulations. People pressed my elbow, whispered thanks, asked for copies of the statute. A teenage kid filmed a short clip for his feed. In the porch-light glow, I saw something return to my neighbors' faces I hadn't seen since moving here, permission to look each other in the eye. I went home, sat at the table, and slid my binder back into its sleeve. The coop rustled softly outside. Winning a point is not winning a war, it's breathing between rounds. And I already knew the next move: clean, legal, surgical. If they wanted to weaponize bylaws, I would weaponize business. Revenge doesn't shout, it files forms and smiles. I woke at 6 a.m., checked feed, wiped the coop rails with vinegar and water, and counted eggs with a steadiness that calmed my pulse. 12 today. Clean shells, warm in my palm. I packed them into recycled cartons I'd saved for months, each labeled with the registration number from the county. A number is a shield when bullies wave paper. By 9 a.m., I'd built a one-page micro-farm policy in crisp fonts, sanitation rules, hours, no roosters, neighbor courtesy. I printed 10 copies and slid them into plastic sleeves. Image matters. Precision matters more. If they came for me, they'd meet a wall of order. I texted 3 neighbors who'd whispered support. "Free eggs today," I wrote. "If you like them, I'll do weekly." They came by at 11 a.m., quiet, grateful. A veteran set cash on my porch and refused change. A young couple offered to bring cartons. A widow asked if I could save 2 for Sunday. I said yes to all of it. Community is a muscle. It grows with use. At 1 p.m., the first reply hit the HOA forum. Commercial activity prohibited. Anonymous. Predictable. A second post tried to paint me careless. I uploaded 1 photo: clean co-op, county letter, registration number visible. No rant, just evidence. Then I shut the app and went back to work. By late afternoon, I'd built a simple ledger. Date, dozen sold, names, amounts. Not just for taxes, for court if needed. I stapled receipts into a binder labeled Crescent Oaks Micro Farm. The name made me smirk. They wanted character. This was character. Night sharpened. A white SUV crawled past again, slowing at the curb. I didn't flinch. I stood in the yard with a broom and waved. The SUV eased on. Quiet speaks when fear refuses. The next morning, I took it further. The county rules allowed distribution at community locations with public access. Neighbors texted, "You sure?" I answered with 2 words, "Very sure." At noon, I rolled my cooler down the street. Sun high, air bright. The pool hissed with chlorine and voices. I set the sign on the public sidewalk. Fresh eggs, county registered. The first buyer was a dad in flip-flops who whispered thanks like I'd smuggled everyone a little freedom. He asked for 2 cartons. Paid full price. He held his receipt like a prayer. 3 sales in, the laughter at the pool faltered. A hush moved along the fence like wind. The gate clicked. Footsteps. I didn't turn. I just set the next carton on the cooler. Calm hands, calm breath. Then a voice coiled behind me, low and shaking. "Pack it up." I pivoted and met her eyes. No anger in mine, only law. Public sidewalk. Registered sales. You don't control this ground. Her stare hardened, her jaw set. She reached for her phone. I looked past her to the crowd, to the cameras, to the opportunity. Today wasn't about eggs, it was about witnesses. Heat slapped off concrete. The gate swung wide and people pretended to stretch just to get closer. I could feel the attention like a stage light. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I pointed to the tiny registration number on my sign and said, "County approved. Agricultural distribution allowed on public right-of-way." Every word clipped, flat, unarguable. She tried intimidation. "You were disrupting a family amenity." I pointed to the sidewalk lines and said, "This is a city-maintained strip. Families are welcome to buy breakfast." A little girl peered over the fence and waved. Her mother tugged her back. "Fear is a reflex here. I hate what it makes people do." Sales continued. A grandmother bought 1 carton and asked if I could add a note with baking times for her grandkids. I wrote it on the lid and signed my name. The human thing in the worst place. The crowd softened toward me, hardened toward her. That's what tyranny never predicts. Hearts change when truth stands calmly. She hissed that the fines would double. I held up my phone and pressed record. Please repeat that, referencing county code. She froze. Cameras lifted. A dad in sunglasses said, "We're live." And just like that, the venue changed. The sidewalk became a courtroom. The neighborhood became a jury. She felt it too. Her shoulders drew up like armor. Sirens didn't wail. They whispered. A cruiser rolled to the curb and parked half a car length back, lights off. The officer stepped out slow, reading faces. He asked for identification. Her hand shot out with a laminated badge. She launched into a speech about community standards. He nodded once, then turned to me. "Your ID and documentation for this setup." I gave him my license, the county letter, the registration, the ledger. My cooler hummed softly in the heat. I could hear the pool filters grinding behind the fence like a tired animal. He moved through the pages, careful, quiet. He asked 2 questions. I answered with yes and no and dates. Facts wear good shoes, they stand up. She started again. She called it a disturbance. She called it a threat to safety. The officer looked at the sidewalk, the line of polite buyers, the kids leaning on towels, and almost smiled. "Ma'am, this is lawful." It landed like a brick in still water. Ripples moved across faces. Phones caught all of it. She demanded he disperse us anyway. He shook his head and handed my documents back. "Keep the walkway clear. Don't block access." I nodded. "Always." He left. The crowd didn't. She leaned in close, voice thin enough to cut. "I will ruin you." I kept my eyes on the ledger and said nothing. Silence can humiliate a tyrant faster than insults. She stepped back like I'd shoved her. A teenager shouted from the fence, "Egg Lady 1, HOA 0. Laughter broke the tension and then quiet settled again. Controlled. Waiting. Watching. I sold out in under an hour. I packed the cooler, folded the sign, and thanked every buyer. Then I turned to the fence and let my voice carry. "I'll be here Saturdays, same place." Her eyes flashed. "We'll see." We would, on camera, in daylight, with proof. By 10 a.m. the next Saturday, the sidewalk looked like a tailgate. Strollers, lawn chairs, sun hats. A line formed with its own quiet etiquette. 1 carton per family until I could increase production. I handed out printed cards with storage tips and a small note about the exemption. People read them like cheat codes. She arrived without sirens, just a rush of perfume and fury. I didn't look up. The cameras did. A teenager perched on a scooter announced, "We're live again, 50 viewers." Then 200. Then comments stacked. "HOA Tyrant Part 2. Stay strong. Know your rights." The algorithm loves conflict. The community loves truth more. She tried a new tactic, blocking the lens with her clipboard. Someone said, "Obstruction." The word cracked something. She retreated half a step, then found a woman in line and hissed about property values. The woman held her carton like a shield and replied, "Breakfast is a value." A small cheer. Short, sharp, enough. I kept the rhythm tight. Sell, receipt, ledger, nod. The line moved like a heartbeat. Every 2 families I angled the sign so the registration number was unmistakable. Evidence builds trust. Trust builds momentum. Momentum crushes bullies. A cruiser eased by again. Same officer. He gave a nod, then parked farther down. Presence without pressure. The crowd relaxed. She overheated. She called the board on speaker and paced the fence, throwing words like lawsuit, injunction, emergency session. The board didn't answer. Not loudly, not on camera. A man I'd never met stepped forward and lifted a printed citation from his pocket. "She fined my mother for a cracked step we already fixed," he said. He handed me the paper and asked if I would hold it for the camera. I did. Date, amount, no proof of inspection. The audience clapped with their thumbs. Comments rolled. Pattern, class action, record everything. She turned on me with a smile that never reached her eyes. "You're making a spectacle." I nodded. "Law is a spectacle when it's been ignored." Her smile fell. A micro flinch. Caught. Then the officer approached and asked evenly, "Mom, we've had a complaint of harassment." She assumed he meant me. She launched into a monologue. He held up a hand. "From the public. About you." The crowd stilled. Her face did something I still can't describe, half laugh, half panic. She asked for names. No one obliged. He took statements. Quiet. Patient. He cited the code about public walkways and non-obstructive commerce. He reminded everyone that intimidation could escalate to disorderly conduct. He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't have to. I sold the last carton and closed the cooler. The chat exploded. Eggs sold out. Do it again. Post the statutes. I posted them that night and pinned the thread. Not a rant. Just links, citations, page numbers. Power, but clean. At dawn the next day, a message arrived in my inbox from an unlisted email. "I have HOA board minutes you should see." One attachment. One sentence previewed in the thumbnail. Enforcement leverage requires narrative control. I stared at the words until the coffee went cold. The attachment opened into a slow-motion confession. Board minutes, vendor lists, motions passed without quorum, fines issued without votes, phrases like make an example and assist compliance through pressure. The person who sent it signed only with an initial. Fear still lived here. But conscience had woken up. I printed everything and added it to the binder. Tabs multiplied. Bylaws, county, sales, witnesses. Now a new tab, leaks. I emailed my lawyer with a subject line that tasted like iron, escalation. She called at 8 a.m. We go formal, she said. State AG complaint, county auditor request, consumer affairs. We'll file sunshine requests for HOA financials. And we'll CC the board so they know the clock started. At 9 a.m., I lodged 3 complaints with clean language and 0 adjectives, facts only, dates, names, statutes. I uploaded clips from the pool, screenshots of citations, and the line in the minutes about narrative control. I included my registration number by habit now. The machine hums faster when the inputs are precise. By noon, the county acknowledged receipt. By 3 p.m., an inspector emailed the HOA for records. I wasn't copied. A board member was. He slipped me the subject line. Records, request, enforcement procedures, and financial disbursements. The words looked like rain on a fire. At 5 p.m., an HOA blast hit the forum, a warning about defamatory campaigns and outside agitators. I didn't answer. Neighbors did. Post the documents, one wrote. If this is above board, prove it. Silence followed. Long, heavy. 2 days later, a county car idled by the clubhouse. A man in a blue windbreaker carried a thin briefcase and a thicker patience. He spoke to the board behind closed doors. He left with a box. News travels inside fences faster than outside. By dusk, I knew they'd taken financial ledgers and vendor contracts. I knew someone had asked for logins to the HOA email. I knew the board went very quiet. That night, an envelope slid under my door. No return address. Inside, printed emails. Conversations about preferred contractors, inspection supplies, and a line that sat in my hand like a live wire. We can steer fines toward projects that reflect our vision. Our vision, their checkbook. I met my lawyer at 7 a.m. She skimmed, nodded once, and said, "This has legs." We drafted a letter to the board demanding rescission of illegal fines, reimbursement to affected homeowners, and an open meeting to address governance failures. We CC'd the county and the state. At the emergency session, the county auditor read from a sheet. His voice was level. The room held its breath. The association has failed to document proper quorum for rule changes, issued fines without due process, and used enforcement language inconsistent with state consumer protection standards. He paused, glanced at his final line, and looked up. The county recommends immediate suspension of punitive enforcement pending audit. The room erupted. Not loud, not chaotic, just the sound of air returning to lungs. Then he added one more sentence and the floor dropped out beneath them. Additionally, we are opening a review of financial transactions tied to enforcement activities. The gavel didn't savor this time. The emergency session smelled like dust and nerves. Folding chairs scraped, neighbors packed the room shoulder to shoulder. The auditor stood at the front with a single folder and the calm of a surgeon. He read findings without adjectives, quorum violations, fines issued without vote, inspections performed off procedure. Each line landed like a hammer on thin glass. I watched faces change. The obedient few stared at the floor. The quiet majority finally looked up. The president tried to retake oxygen. Community standards, she began. The auditor lifted a palm. Standards do not excuse unlawful process. A murmur rolled the length of the room. A dad who'd been fined for a mailbox raised his hand and asked where the board recorded votes. Silence. The auditor turned to the treasurer. Records? A shrug. The kind that sounds like guilt. I stood and held my binder to my chest. Rescind. Publicly. Tonight. The word hung there, dangerous and clean. The auditor nodded once. Recommended. The board huddled behind a folding table that suddenly looked too small for their power. Their whispers had edges. Their eyes searched for exits that weren't doors. A former board member in the third row cleared his throat. He confessed to pressure tactics, to being told whom to cite, to being told the fines, kept the lights pretty. The room flinched as if struck. The president's jaw set. She tried to paint him bitter. He lifted printed emails. Date, sender, command. The lie died mid-sentence. The auditor announced an immediate pause on punitive enforcement pending audit. Applause didn't explode, it sharpened. Tight, relieved, decisive. The president grabbed the gavel like a life vest. She tried to adjourn. The auditor spoke over the wood. One more item. He read a new line. County review of financial disbursements tied to enforcement. The word review felt like a door creaking open to a darker hallway. I felt heat climb my neck, not from fear, but from the sense of a wall finally shifting. The widow with the blue porch squeezed my arm. "Don't stop," she whispered. Her voice trembled with years. The treasurer fumbled a statement about preferred vendors. A neighbor raised a vendor list that didn't match last year's report. 2 names repeated, same address, different shell. The auditor wrote it down like a man collecting rain in a pail. I asked for one more action, refunds of illegal fines to every household, plus a public apology to veterans, seniors, and families targeted. Heads nodded. Some cried. The auditor said refunds would depend on findings. I said findings would have receipts. I lifted my ledger like a flag. The president announced a recess and fled the side door. The board scattered behind her like birds startled by a storm. People didn't chase. They turned to one another and started trading copies of statutes. For the first time, fear wasn't the loudest voice in the room. I packed the binder and stepped into night air so clean it stung. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. A text appeared with a single sentence. You'll want the minutes they hid. A second message, a location, the pool, after dark. I looked back at the clubhouse, lights still on, shadows moving. I looked at the text again. Midnight. Pool. Proof. I slid the binder under my arm and walked toward the water. The pool at midnight breathes like a sleeping animal. Water lights ripple against concrete. The fence clicks behind you and the neighborhood hush presses close. I stood under the lone lamp and waited with the binder tucked tight. Footsteps approached from the service path, careful, not sneaky, the walk of someone tired of hiding. Tom stepped into light, shoulders rounded, eyes rimmed red, former board member. He didn't shake my hand. He just held out a manila envelope with both palms like an offering. "I should have done this a year ago," he said. His voice felt scraped raw. The envelope was heavy. Inside, minutes labeled, working drafts never posted, vendor bids edited after selection, fines tallied on a separate sheet marked amenity enhancements, emails that read like commands, not deliberations. We sat on cold concrete and went page by page. The pattern was a blueprint for punishment. Identify a house, craft a pretext, issue a fine, escalate, and funnel proceeds to pet projects. Names repeated. The widow, the veteran, me. It wasn't incompetence, it was a business model. Headlights slashed across the fence, a car idled. The silhouette in the driver's seat was unmistakable. She washed without rolling down the window. Tom swallowed and whispered, "She knows." The engine revved and drifted off, slow, like a threat mailed instead of thrown. The empty lane felt suddenly smaller. I asked Tom why now. He rubbed his thumb over a coffee stain on one page and said he couldn't sleep after the porch blue incident. We broke her. To prove a point, he looked at the water. I let it happen. Shame makes a man older by years in a sentence. I said nothing. I let him hand me the rest. We copied the drive that night, emails, scanned checks, cross-referenced ledgers. He'd kept a meticulous, guilty archive. My lawyer would call it evidence. I called it the last piece we needed to turn the audit into a reckoning. 2 hours later, I walked back streets so quiet I could hear my own breath. Porch lights blinked one by one as motion sensors tracked me. Somewhere a dog barked twice and fell silent. Fear tried to crawl up my spine. I straightened my shoulders and kept moving. Law over chaos. Steps over shivers. On my porch, a new note lay face down. Black marker. Stay in your lane. The letters were jagged, impatient. I took a photo, slid it into a plastic sleeve, and filed it behind threats, a category I never wanted to own. I called the sheriff at 7 a.m. The deputy took photos, lifted prints from the fence where the last vandal had leaned, and promised patrols. He didn't shrug. He didn't minimize. He wrote slowly, like a man who understood that paper can be armor. By noon, my lawyer had the envelope scanned, indexed, and packaged for the county and the state. We filed supplemental complaints citing deceptive practices and potential fraud. We copied the press. We did it by the book, line by line, so nothing could slip through. That evening, the HOA blasted the forum with a claim of staged materials. I answered with a single sentence and 4 attachments. Original metadata attached. And then I logged off. No arguments, only clocks and stamps. At dusk, the county scheduled interviews. The auditor wanted sworn statements at 9 a.m. Tom said he'd come clean. The pool lights clicked on behind the fence. The sound reminded me of a switch being thrown. In the quiet, my phone buzzed. Unknown caller, blocked ID, then a whisper. Drop it or we drop you. I didn't drop it. I doubled it. We arranged a meeting with the prosecutor's office for 11 a.m. I carried 2 binders, mine and Tom's. He walked beside me like a man walking into weather he deserved. The assistant prosecutor listened longer than I expected, asked cleaner questions than I'd rehearsed, and took the drive with the caution of a bomb tech. "We'll need corroboration," she said. "We brought it," I answered, and slid the email thread about narrative control across the table. By afternoon, subpoenas moved. The county auditor returned to the clubhouse with a larger team. Laptops opened. A lockbox came out from a cabinet like a guilty secret. Passwords changed hands with fists clenched around keys. The board tried to look cooperative. Cooperation looks different when the door is already open. Neighbors stood outside in small knots, whispering. Courage organizes itself when given a schedule. 2 veterans gave statements about flag citations. A teacher brought receipts. The widow with the porch color handed over her original paint approval. Each document was a pebble. Together, they were a slide. The president avoided the crowd, chose back doors, chose silence where she once chose spectacle. Her power needed fear and angles and a gavel. The law needed none of that. It needed witnesses and ink. The sound of printers hummed like a new weather system. At 6 p.m., the board called a community update. The president read from a sheet while not meeting anyone's gaze. During the audit, enforcement is suspended. Then, the line she hated most, refunds will be issued where warranted. The room didn't clap, it absorbed. Then a voice from the back, Tom said, "I participated in wrong decisions, I'm sorry." He listed them. Not to grovel, to document. The apology landed heavier than her announcement. The chat lit up again that night, clips of the officer validating the sidewalk sales, screenshots of statutes, links to the county portal. I pinned one post, "Know your rights, know your process, keep your records." It wasn't a victory lap, it was a manual. 2 days later, the local paper ran a headline about HOA under audit for enforcement and finances. They quoted the county, they quoted the law, they quoted neighbors who had been quiet for years. The comments weren't cruel, they were tired and ready. That matters. At dawn on the 3rd day, I found my coop gate open. Eggs smashed in the dirt. The hens huddled, unharmed but trembling. I cleaned in silence, jaw tight. I filed another report with photos and timestamps. Patience looks like weakness to cowards. It isn't, it's aim. By noon, the prosecutor called, "We're opening an inquiry." My knees almost failed me right there on the porch. Not happiness, something tougher. The feeling of a locked door giving to pressure you didn't think you could exert. We scheduled a public forum with the county to explain refunds and election procedures. The community printed flyers. The teenagers promised to stream. The veterans offered to sit up front. The widow baked a tray of cookies like a sacrament. That evening, the president pulled her car to the curb outside my house and idled. She didn't get out. She didn't glare. She just stared at the cedar fence like it had spoken. Then she drove away. I fed the hens and watched the sun set over roofs that finally looked like a neighborhood instead of a stage. Tomorrow, the forum answers or evasions, but no more darkness. The county forum filled before the doors finished swinging. People stood along walls, others watched on phones from the sidewalk. The auditor went first, findings, refunds, governance training, and a call for a special election supervised by the county. The assistant prosecutor outlined the inquiry, neutral, clear, no drama, law in its best voice. The room exhaled for the first time in a year. Then the microphone found me. I didn't deliver a speech, I delivered a ledger, dates when fines arrived without votes, clips when sidewalk sales were ruled lawful, screenshots of the clause that protected small agriculture. I pointed to neighbors and named their courage. I did not name the vandal. I let the reports do that. Precision beats fury. The president read a statement about misunderstandings and commitment to improvement. The crowd didn't jeer. They waited. When she reached the line about community trust, the veteran with the flag stood and asked, "Will you resign?" The silence after that question felt like a courtroom. She didn't answer. She folded the paper and left through the side door she used for every escape. The board followed, smaller than when they entered. Refunds began the next week, checks in envelopes that looked oddly humble after the swagger of citations. The widow cried at her mailbox and pressed the paper to her chest. The teacher framed the notice that voided her fines as a reminder. The dad with the mailbox rebuilt the step and left an extra board on my porch as thanks. We held a neighborhood ballot under white tents. No whispers, no side deals. We voted for people who said please and thank you and read the statutes before they spoke. The county certified results. The new board shook hands with the auditor and asked for a governance workshop. Imagine that, leaders asking how to lead. I reopened my stand as a co-op, not a spectacle, a service. Pay what you can on Saturdays and a basket for the food pantry. The hens settled back into their rhythm like a drum you can count on. Kids visited to learn how eggs happen. They left with stickers that said, "Know your rights." It made the parents laugh and then nod. 6 months later, a moving truck idled outside the president's house. No speeches, no fury, just cardboard and tape and the quiet gravity of consequence. She drove away without looking back. We didn't cheer. We mowed, we waved, we lived. On a warm evening, the block gathered at the pool, not for spectacle, but for barbecue and ordinary noise. I stacked a final carton on a picnic table with a handwritten note, "For the widow with the blue porch." She smiled without apology. The veteran raised a cup and said, "To law over chaos." The cheer was soft and strong. I walked home under string lights and let the relief reach bone. Not victory over a person, victory over a pattern. The kind that steals dignity one fine at a time and calls it order. We chose another order. If you've ever been pushed by a small throne on a short stage, hear me, keep records, know your code, move in daylight, and never mistake patience for surrender. Calculated steps beat loud threats. Law beats noise. If this story gave you something, courage, a plan, a breath you needed, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Like the video so this knowledge travels. Good people can still win. We just have to stand together.